I came across this video on YouTube. It was some podcast conversation, and there was this title, Alpha Generation is Doomed. And that felt like such a definitive, massive statement to make. So let me start there. How do you feel as someone who is an expert on this subject, or at least as someone who has done so much work in this area? How do you feel when you come across statements like that?
Well, I don't think it does us any good to go into such a negative way of thinking about things. A lot of my work has to do with helping parents reframe their thinking, because it's our thoughts that generate our emotions, which generate our behavior and our reactions. And so, when we go into everything thinking, we're doomed, what's the point?
Yeah. But there is definitely, parents are scared, I feel, because of the things that are happening online. I think social media has a lot to do with it, but also in general, the way children are maturing very early, the way the interactions are changing, there is definite element of fear in parents. How do you feel about that? Because I bet there are a lot of listeners who are either expecting kids or raising young kids and feeling these emotions where they want to do their very, very best for their kid, but they're unable to get into the right frame of mind. The fear is more dominant than anything else. What would you say to parents like that?
I think fear is our greatest problem today. We are so afraid of everything. And I'm not saying there aren't things to be afraid of, but I'm not sure there are that many things to be afraid of that haven't always been there. Not the same things, but fear, parents' fear is probably the number one problem for our growing children today. Because because of our fear, we're not allowing our children to freely play, to make mistakes, to deal with natural consequences of life. And they're not learning they're not learning to be interdependent, which is, it's not independent, it's not dependent, it's interdependence that we really need the most. And we're not allowing our children to learn that. We're not allowing them to become resilient. We're not allowing them to become responsible people.
What do you mean by interdependence?
Interdependence is when you really depend on other people and they depend on you. And so it's about intercommunication. It's about helping each other. It's about doing for each other. It's not independence. I'm all for independence and raising children to be independent, but we don't want them to be just me, 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 me. Everything is about me, right? We want our children to be respectful and responsible and considerate and think about what they have to contribute to the world at large. And that requires interdependence.
How do you think the younger generation, like right now, the kids that are in school, how have they changed from previous generations? Because I see your point. The way my mother was raised and the way I was raised is a world of difference between those two methods. Like she was one of seven kids. I'm one of two kids. Like this is me and my brother. So we understand that distinction as well. But how have things changed so far as upbringing is concerned, and so far as the children themselves are concerned? How are these kids different?
That is a very big question. And I could go on and on and on. I don't think we can lump all children into one basket.
For sure.
But I do think how culture has changed has all to do with how children have changed. And we are so focused on children being taught and told and directed all the time. And that, I think, changed back in the maybe late late 70s, early 80s, when we first saw the picture of a missing child on the side of a milk carton. And from that point on, we just went down that hill of fear. And children were more and more reined in, less and less able to do things on their own. And children's freedom has become highly restricted, which I think, and I am not the only one, a lot of people who are writing about it today, which has probably a lot more to do with the anxiety in this generation than social media or anything else, although that contributes a great amount. But the lack of freedom, and I believe that the lack of freedom that our children have today has all to do with why they are spending all their time on a screen, because they don't go out playing. They don't go out in the woods. They don't discover. They don't get creative. I know I might be sounding like the older generation, which I certainly am, but it's not that at all. It's that we have gotten so overprotective of our children, and we are involved in everything they do and how they do it, that they have gotten dependent on someone else to tell them what and how to do it. Sports, always with a coach. Kids don't go out and just go to the playground and play anymore. Their friends are all on screens, and it's kind of an impossible task. And organized sports are all organized and supervised, and kids can't make up rules anymore. So we've got to give them the opportunity to think outside the box, to create rules, to create games, to get inventive and imaginative. And they're not doing it anymore. They're sitting in front of a screen watching somebody else do it. And this is the biggest challenge of today.
That is definitely undeniable. I think we see it all the time and everywhere.
Yeah.
And I definitely want to go deeper into that. But first, I would like to ask you, at what age do kids start absorbing information, behavior that affects their mentality, their personality, their mental setup?
Oh, right as soon as they have any self-awareness. Very, very early on. Because everything we say to them, be careful, don't do that, stop doing that, you can't do that. No, 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 watch out, you're going to fall. Right away. It's, it's either something to be afraid of or something to fight against, depending on your temperament.
Okay, so as soon as you're like talking to your child and directing them in any way, it starts at that point.
It really does. And how you are as a parent, how easy you are, or how frightened you are, has all to do with how you're going to talk to your child. Whether it's, oh, you want to jump off that? Well, let's make sure. Well, let me be here with you and see how high you can jump. And or no, 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 don't do that. Don't do that. And so it always comes back to the parent or the adult in the room, and the tone and everything that they're presenting to a child. And if you can be easy and laid back, then your kid can be more easy and laid back and take more risks. That's another thing. We've got to allow children to take more risks. But parents are terrified. And I understand.
Right, right. So there is some truth to the energetic feedback. This whole idea that the mother's energy, the parent's energy, the primary caregiver's energy has a massive impact on the child's personality.
Absolutely. And I have I have written a book called When Your Kids Push Your Buttons, which is all about the psychology of the parent, because one of the greatest needs for children to grow happy and strong and resilient is for parents to do their own work and their own healing. And I think and for a long time, I've been doing this work for almost 35 years. And for a great deal of that time, so much of the focus of my work has been on helping parents understand where their children are coming from so that they don't react so much. But what really is the problem is that we have to understand ourselves and what we believe in order to change our reactions. Let me get a little more specific about that. As I said earlier, it's our thoughts, what we think about a situation, a child, what we think about ourselves, has all to do with how we feel, and it's our emotions that generate our reactions. So if I think my child will never listen, or if I think I am such a failure as a parent, I can't do this anymore. I can't control my child. Then the emotions from both of those thoughts, you can imagine there's a lot of guilt and resentment and anger and hopelessness, which then leads you to caving in or reacting in anger, all of which highly affect our children. And so in order to look at those thoughts that we have, we've got to look at our expectations and where they come from. All of us grew up in families where we heard things from our parents, and because of our temperaments, our inborn temperaments, we interpreted those messages from our parents a certain way from a very, very, very immature brain. We learned that we weren't good enough, that we were stupid, that we didn't have enough knowledge to do this, that we, whatever. Parents make remarks all the time, unintentionally, but boy, do they land with great intention on children. And so when we grow up with, for instance, a message that I'm not good enough, I can't ever make decisions, I shouldn't be vocal, I shouldn't be emotional, I'm too emotional. All of that goes into how we view our child. And when our child starts yelling and screaming or saying, no, you can't make me, and you're not the boss of me, and all those things, children yell and scream, and they get a lot worse. We need to be the sounding board for that, not the reactionary that then sends our children those messages that they have to heal themselves from. That's generational trauma.
There's so much to get into
Yes,
now
there
at this point.
is.
Firstly, like we are talking about how parents, their own trauma can potentially affect the upbringing of the child.
Yes.
Would you recommend that a parent, before they have the child, they go through therapy, they work on their own emotions, their own whatever issues they are consciously or unconsciously aware of, or consciously aware of, and anything else that may be cluttering up their mental space? Or can they do this as they're raising their kid?
Absolutely. They can do it as they're raising their kid. Both. I would say both is great. As soon as you're aware that the way you think about things is affecting your life in a negative way, that's a great time to get into therapy. Often when you get into a relationship with someone, all of that comes up. However, when we think about kids pushing our buttons, those buttons, mostly parents think, how do I get my kid to stop doing that? That is not okay that they're pushing my buttons. I've got to make my child stop. Instead, we need to realize that those buttons are ours. They were planted there in our childhoods, and they're just getting tapped by our children. right? So those buttons are those deep-seated beliefs that we all carry about ourselves, both positive and negative. So it's when those buttons get tapped that suddenly we feel like a different human being. Where did that come from? Suddenly out of my mouth comes my mother and father saying those words I swore I was never going to say, right? So understanding those buttons often doesn't come to the surface until we have kids, because nobody pushes our buttons like our kids. So a lot of that comes up when you start to have children. And, I often say the greatest gift you can ever give your child is to do your own work, get into your own therapy, and do your own healing. And when you are learning to be a better, more respectful, responsible parent to your children, you're doing it for yourself as well. You are healing yourself. So it goes very much together.
Okay, I have massive respect for therapy, but we are right now also talking about overdiagnosed people
Yes.
and excessive therapy, too much dependence on your therapist forging your thoughts at some point. So as you are interacting with your kid, you're forging a bond there. I have a young niece and I see her interacting with her parents. That's a her relationship. I always see that and I think it's so cool because they're young, like they're in their 30s, but they play with her, they get down to her level, and that's how they talk to her. The energy is so amazing. She treats them like they're her buds, and I love that.
Yes.
Now, if somebody has a lot of emotional clutter, like if I were a parent, I think I would also place myself in therapy as I'm raising my kid. I would like to do that, I think. But how do we ensure that we are working on the emotional clutter, but we are also independently forging a bond with our kid and not letting our therapist direct all of it?
I'm not sure about the letting the therapist direct, but in terms of the emotional clutter and being a responsible parent, I do a lot of work with parents on boundaries. And I use the word boundaries differently. It is not synonymous with limits. Limits is when you say, this is not okay, I can't allow you to do that. A boundary is the psychological space between me and you, between me and my child, so that on my side of the boundary, I know what my problems are, I know what my issues are, I know what is my responsibility and not my child's. So when you have poor boundaries, you're constantly asking your children to take care of your problems, right? Just stop being so loud. Could you just stop? Don't do that. Don't do that. This is all so that I can feel like a better parent and I can have a more convenient time, right? We're constantly asking our children to take care of our problems. On the other side of that boundary is our child and our child's issues and problems, right? It is not our job to solve our children's problems. That's something that is really hard and mind blowing for parents to really grasp. It is not our job to make our children happy, right? We are not responsible for their happiness. We are not responsible for their feelings. We are not even responsible for their behavior. What we are responsible for is every word that comes out of our mouth, every tone we send to them. We are 100% responsible for ourselves and how we respond and react. Children are responsible for theirs. Now, when you have a healthy boundary, then you know that you can help each other with their problems. So if I say to my child, I have a splitting headache today, I just had the worst time, I'm feeling really exhausted, I would just love to have 10 minutes where I don't have to answer any questions and I can just sit down with a cup of tea. That's asking my child to help me with my problem. If I am not dumping my problem on my child is going to be far more ready and willing to say, okay, mom, I'll go, play with my whatever. If my child is having a problem, and that's what we want to look at, every situation that comes up, whose problem is it? Is that mine or my child's? So my child is complaining about a friend or a sibling or a whatever. Whoever has the initial upset or complaint is the one who owns the problem. So my child is having a meltdown because I cut her sandwich wrong, right? That's my child's problem. Now, that does not mean I wash my hands of that problem and say, sorry, kid, you deal with it. It means my job is to fully support my child in her problem, but not to fix it, not to jump in there and make everything okay. Now, with very young children, of course, you're going to distract them as much as possible. You're going to help them go through things. But with tantrums and meltdowns, you want to let the child have it and go all through the arc of the emotion and then come back out of it, and then you talk about it. But to try to get a child to stop having an emotional upheaval is crossing the boundary and taking responsibility for the child. Does that make sense?
I would like to go a little deeper
Yes.
into this, because when you say that a parent is not responsible the happiness of a child, like if it's a young kid, it's a minor, you would think that the parent is in fact responsible
Yes, you would.
for if the child is having a meltdown in response to a sandwich not being correct. Perhaps someone would question, what sort of environment have you created that not every kid would have a meltdown over something like that? Only certain kids would have a meltdown over a sandwich not being cut right. So there has to be a larger factor, an issue at play. Perhaps this is just me trying to understand.
Right. Well, with the sandwich being cut a certain way, that is probably happening for a 2 or a 3-year-old who is in that developmental stage where they know exactly how they want something to be. And if you don't do it right, it's like the world has come to an end. A lot of that is the parent understanding that this is development and you just support the child through the meltdown. You can't know ahead of time. If you decide that it's your fault for cutting the sandwich wrong, then every single thing your child gets upset about becomes your fault. You see, if I take responsibility for my child's emotions, then I am responsible for every time my child gets upset about something. So
Okay.
then I am gone. I am not able to help my child. You see what I mean? So if I don't take responsibility, then I can fully take in my child's experience and I can support my child. You really are angry because that sandwich didn't get cut the way you wanted it to. You wanted it cut in squares, and I cut it in triangles. Bummer. That's a bummer. Let the child have the meltdown. They know they're understood. But if I take responsibility for it and I think that I've done something wrong because I'm not good enough and I can't ever make the right decisions about anything from God knows when, then I'm going to get angry. I'm going to say, get over it, kid. It's in triangles instead of squares. What is the big deal? That's not helpful to the child, right? Now, the other piece about the child's happiness, I am 100% responsible for every opportunity I present to my child, right? For everything I choose, every toy I choose to buy, every um, every activity I choose for my child to be involved in, I'm fully responsible for that. But if I sign my child up for baseball and he starts playing baseball and decides he hates it, is that my fault? No, absolutely not. Right?
Let me share with you what I've understood and tell me if I'm wrong.
Yes.
So we started the conversation with how children in this day and age are very restricted, overprotective parents. So when you say that you are not responsible for your child's reactions, their emotions, and the behavior that is a result of those emotions and those ideas that, whatever they experience, you are basically telling the parent that manage your own emotions and therefore your own behavior. Don't focus so much on how the child reacts, because if you try to do that, that is when we start to restrict the kid. We become overprotective because now we are trying to control something that is outside our control.
Comes full circle, doesn't it?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yes, that was beautifully done. I got it.
Well, you're the one who just brought it full circle. That was great. Yeah.
Yeah. I'd never considered that. That makes so much sense, considering I spent a lot since my niece's birth, ever since I've been thinking about becoming a parent. I spent a lot of my time thinking about it, and that never occurred to me. I do have to ask now. Their parents are obviously the primary caregiver, has the most influence on the kid, but there are so many other factors at play, and especially in this world as social media brings all kinds of strangers into the child's life. Now, today, I came across this article in The Guardian that's talking about in UK, more than 4,000 parents have joined a group committed to barring young children from having smartphones as concerns grow about online safety and the impact of social media on mental health. Now, this is a very legitimate concern to me. I'm not a parent, but when I think about it, my head spins when I think about protecting my child from all of these influences.
Yep.
How do we go about that? Because then you are not the only one raising, like my mother always points out, that the parent is not the only one raising the kid. There are so many other parties involved.
Yes. Yes. So the parent is the most important person raising the kid.
Absolutely.
So the connection that a child has with the parent, as long as if it's a really good connection, which is why this is all so important. If you have a really good connection with your parent, then you can feel safe and free to bring your problems to your parent, because you know they're not going to get in there and fix it for you. Kids don't want parents to fix their problems, right? They don't want parents to come in and say, "Oh my God, some stranger contacted you on the internet," and freak out. They want to be able to come to a parent and say, "Some stranger contacted me. I don't know what to do." And for the parent to then say, "All right, let's look at this." But that connection is the number one, not the only, but the number one qualifier in all of the things that we fear for our kids, right? All right, so that's the one piece of it. Another piece of it, oh, there's so many pieces to social media. I am thrilled with what you just read about these parents coming together, because that's what needs to happen. Parents need to come together in huge groups and say, "We're not giving our kids phones until they're this age. We're not allowing social media until they're this age." And that's what parents need, because you, as a single parent, if you go to your child and say you can't have a phone until such and such an age, you are going to create a massive gap with between you and your child when all of his friends have phones and are on social media. That's what's so hard for parents. I don't want my child to feel like odd man out. He's not going to have any friends if he doesn't play this particular video game, you know? So en masse is what we need to do. That's very encouraging to hear that. And you can do it in your own communities too, or within your school community. But it's a lot of work. The challenge is, and this is maybe going to sound like an oxymoron here, I'm also going to say that it's important for parents to stop putting so much negative energy on phones and social media and internet. Do all the parental controls you can. Absolutely. It's very important. But this is something, if you're concerned about this, it means your child is being sucked in, right? They love being on a screen, whether they're playing video games, whether they're watching YouTubes, whether they're on TikTok, whether they're texting constantly, whatever it is, it's important to them.
Right.
What we have to understand as parents, one of the basics, is your child's agenda is just as important to your child as your agenda is to you. And we have to be considerate of that. When we jump on our kids and say, no, you can't do this, this is wrong. How many times have I told you? We set a timer, you're not getting off. And all of their interaction with a screen outside the screen itself is negative. What we're doing is sending our kids into it more and more and more.
Right.
What
Right.
these games, let's just say video games for one, what they have done for children is create these challenges that children love. They love challenges. They love to master a skill and feel competent. And that's what they're doing when they're playing these video games. It's very, very important that parents understand this, that it's not just staring at a blank wall. It's and there are a lot of positives that come from kids playing video games. That said, there are so many times that I have heard parents complain about what happens to kids once they get off, and the aggression and the anger and the wiredness and the craziness that takes them over. So, as I say, it's very important for us to put less negative energy on what our kids love to do. We have to put that energy on more creative, inventive things that we can challenge our children to do, right? Because kids aren't out on their own with other kids making up games and creating rules and inventing things and playing with things that are a little risky, this is where they're getting their challenge, on a screen. So we've got to let them have these challenges among themselves. We've got to pull back from being so afraid of what they're doing in their lives and let them go play with each other. And again, that's a really tough thing, because you can't send your kid out to play when all of his friends are inside on screens. So it's a catch-22. But
Yep.
my advice to parents is to put less negative energy on the screens and put that energy on getting your child excited about other things. Create an obstacle course in your backyard. Play games with your kid where you let them make up the rules. Do fun, inventive things with your kids. And the other problem is parents don't have the time. Parents are so wrapped up in everything they're doing on their screens. Our world is just, and here we are on our screens. But it's good stuff. You're in India. I'm in New Hampshire in the States. And we can talk to each other. It's pretty
Yeah,
great.
yeah, pretty great. Yeah. Yeah, I heard a mom say this in one of the forums where they were discussing the concerns around cocoa melon. Apparently, most kids are addicted to cocoa melon. It's kids, like young little kids, 1 year, 2 year old kids. It's fun poem songs that change. The visual changes every 3 seconds. It's very addicted to the kids. So it's something on those lines. And the moms were talking about it, and then one of the moms said that you gotta give them a good substitute. You don't want the kid on the television. The reason that you place them in front of the television is because you don't have time.
Because you don't want to interact with them. Yeah.
Yeah, because to feed your kid without the TV takes like an hour to get them to finish their meal. That's what she shared, that it takes me an hour to feed my kid without the TV on. But she does finish the meal, but it just takes an hour for me to sit there, talk to her, make funny noises with each bite, and then she finishes it. But if I put the TV on, then she'll get done in 10 minutes, but then she's not going to leave the TV for a long time after that.
That is a very, very, very slippery slope.
Yeah,
Plus, the
exactly.
child should be feeding herself. She shouldn't be feeding her child.
For sure, yeah. I think this was a year-old kid, and again, it's like, let's get this done with.
I
Let's get
know,
this. Let's. What's the
exactly.
next thing? What's the next thing?
Exactly, right.
Yeah,
I know.
I do sympathize with these parents because I do understand.
Totally. It's so hard. It's so hard to try to do it all. And, we're not evolved to do that. We are evolved to live in tribal culture where there are lots and lots of people raising the kids, you know? And and then, my heart really goes out to single parents. I don't know how they can, I right now I have 5 grandkids ranging in age from 12 to 5 months. And my daughter has a 2-year-old and a 5-month-old. And let me tell you, it's intense. It's really intense. And if you don't have help, it's very tough. Very, very tough.
Yeah.
I know. Yeah.
I want to discuss with you another aspect of this conversation that we're having. Now, with social media, we see very, very young kids now. It's kind of cool, but it's also very concerning. These very young adolescents forming ideologies around the important things in the world, like identity politics. They have opinions about like the wars that are happening in the world, what's one country, like they're talking about things that we never discussed at that age. Like they were not our concern, but they are participating in very mature conversations now, very, very young kids. And one of the major reasons is because they're on Instagram, they're on TikTok, and these are young
Yeah.
adolescent, young teens who are now participating in like major discussions, identity politics. They are talking about how the government should be treating its citizens, and they are willing and happy to take to the streets and protest and do candle marches. And I think it's kind of cool, but it's also very, very concerning because then we also talk about how our brain doesn't develop till we're, I think, 26 years old. Or, but so they're participating in these very mature discussions, which means that they're also shaping their personality with each discussion and how they're going to show up in the world, how they're going to interact with their fellow human beings. But they're still at an age where parents feel responsible. They are responsible. They have to intervene and make sure that their child is growing up to be a decent human being. How do parents navigate that?
By having all these discussions with your kids and by welcoming their opinions and their points of view on everything. And then saying, perhaps, I don't agree with that. I think such and such. You see, what we need to get away from in parenting is directing our children and saying, you can't do that. You have to. You need to. All of the limit setting is personal, right? Every family has a different right line. And so to set a limit, it's much more effective to say, I don't want that. I'm not okay with you doing such and such. And then you can get into a discussion about it. Let kids argue, let kids negotiate. It's good for their brains to do all that. Hear their points of view and either take in new information and say, you know what, I never thought of it that way. That makes a lot of sense. Or I get it, I know how important this is to you, and I'm still going to say no, or I'm still going to disagree. And when it comes to politics and the world, and, I ask parents all the time, what do you talk about at the dinner table? Do you talk about what's going on in the world? And so many parents just focus on their own little lives and telling kids, you've got to do this, and have you done this homework, and what's going on with this project, and you've got to do blah blah blah. They don't even know who their parents are as people. Talk about history, your history, the world history. Talk about what's going on in the world. Talk about the wars when you think your kids are old enough to deal with it, and I think certainly by 12 they are. Get into, what do you think of this? Here's what I heard this in the news today, and I was so upset about that. That's how kids learn values, when you really can talk about your values. So I don't think you need to get that from a screen. You need to get that from your parents. And parents need to be willing to talk about what's going on in the world, and gender identity, and all of the things that so many parents are afraid of. And, it's kids are ready for things so much earlier than parents are ready.
So true. So true. Yeah. I remember, I think I was very young, not that young. I think I was in high school, 14 years old, I think. I brought up premarital sex with my parents, and my parents were shocked. I'm in conservative Indian family. Marriage happens after, sex happens after marriage. Like,
Right.
that's understood. And my mom was just looking at me like, what is happening right now? But I praise her. I applaud the way both of my parents handled. Both of them are very conservative people, but they really control their reaction. Now when I look back, I remember the expression on their faces, and they were so uncomfortable and so worried and so concerned. I was, I think I was, yeah, I think I was in high school, but my mom kept saying, I don't think that's the right thing to do. I don't think that's the right thing to do.
That's, you see,
Yeah.
I
So,
don't think that's okay. Not, don't let
yeah.
me catch you doing that. Right? Yeah.
And my father's like, you have to make your choices, but it's better if you find a loving partner and you have some degree of commitment, but you have to make your own choices.
That's
And
great.
I to this day, I tell my parents that was some excellent parenting right there.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. We think that we've got to punish our children to get any kind of a lesson across. And it's exactly the opposite. Every time there is a punishment or a consequence dealt with by the parent, we are robbing them of their ability to make good decisions, to be accountable. We need to problem solve. When there is a problem, get together, talk about it, say, this doesn't work for me. How do we make this work for both of us so we both get what we want? And it's an anomaly for most parents. They feel lost without punishment or consequences. They don't know how they can do it. It's a relationship. The parent child relationship is a relationship just like anyone else's. And that is what we want to nurture and foster, is that relationship, not the hierarchy of the parent telling the child how to be, what to do, what to think, what to wear.
Right.
It's Not about that. But we think we're going to lose control if we don't have those methods. But that's the thing. Can you parent your children without control? Because that's where we want to go. It is not okay to control. What we want is to bring our children up to feel their own self-control. And for us, discipline is about having self-control so that we can teach. Discipline is all about the word teach. Discipline is very, very important. Discipline does not mean punishment. Discipline means, what are my values? How am I going to impart my values to my children so that they hear them? And punishment is pushing them away from our values and breaking connection every time.
So, what do you think is the sweet spot where the parents establish themselves as the acknowledged authority in their child's life? Because I think that creates a sense of safety. You know, your parents can make the decision if you're not able to, so you go to them. The parent commands respect, but at the same time, the child also feels like, this is my friend. This person is so completely in my corner that I can talk about anything. I can share anything. I don't need an outside person to help me deal with anything.
I don't know about no outside person, because as your children grow, when they're in their teen years, especially preteen, teen, there are going to be lots of things they don't want to tell you about because they don't want to disappoint you. They don't want you to worry about them. You know, parenting is impossible without worry of some sort. And kids don't want to worry their parents, so they're going to so there's a lot of stuff that kids aren't going to tell their parents about that hopefully they will find someone else to talk to about. But what you want is for your teenager to, for instance, be approached by a peer. Let's go do this. Let's try this. Let's do such and such. And what you want, and this is, you can't control this at all, what you want is for that child to first think, what would mom or dad say? Before it's, what would my friends say if I say yes or no, right? You want your child to think, what would mom or dad say? They're not necessarily going to go ask you, but they know. They know. So that means that bond is really tight. So you want to have that bond, but also you want to give your children the freedom to have their own relationships and their own friends that are who are important to them. I don't know if you ever experienced this, but as a teenager, if you note disapproval from your parents about a friend, it's as if they have completely disapproved of you. Your friends are your choice. They're very, very important to you. And if your parents disapprove of your friends openly, verbally, it's like cutting you in half. So to say, I don't want you hanging out with those kids, I don't like them, I don't like where they're coming from, that's very dangerous territory. What you want to do, and I'm not saying that all parents should approve of all their kids' friends, but it's how you go about it. If you fear that your child is involved with kids who are very questionable, you first want to ask yourself why. What is my child getting from these friends? And when a child knows that they can't go to a parent if they need to, if they want to, well, they don't want to. If they've gotten to that point where I can't trust my parent to listen to my side of the story, I can't trust my parent to understand why I might want to do this or that, then that line of communication is going to be shut off. And they're going to choose kids of very similar situations, probably other kids who have cut off from their parents, right? So you want to ask yourself, why is my child focused on these kids? And then how can I change myself? What do I need to bring to my child to pull them back in to a connection with me? What do I need? And if you've gotten to that at that point where your child has pretty much said, I don't want to hear from you anymore, it's really, really tough, but it's not impossible. It's just you've got to really be willing to pull way, way, way back on your demands, your expectations, to be that safe space again. It's hard.
Okay, that is massively helpful. Thank you for that. There is something this happened a lot in India. This was recently, like it was in the news. It's a major concern in India. Children love their parents. The parents love their kids. They have an excellent bond. And in India, I don't know if you're aware of this, but there is a lot of importance is given to academic performance. Most kids in India are raised to study hard. This is very, very important. Make a good future for yourself. All good. At least to me, it seems all good. But now one of the things that is happening is these kids, they get into good schools, but if they mess up, if they're not able to perform or they fail, a lot of these kids are committing suicide. Sometimes the parents have taken a lot of money to put that kid through that school. Sometimes the parents probably told the kid how proud I am, or whatever factors are at play. But these are all parents who love their kids. The kids love their parents, and yet the only solution the kid can come up with when they realize that this has happened, my parent is going to be disappointed, is suicide. So that's something I fail to understand. When a loving bond exists, why would that happen?
So one of the things that I say all the time is how important acceptance is of your children, more important than love. I see probably 99.5, maybe even 99.9% of parents all over the world love their children. The percentage of parents who fully, unconditionally accept their children for who they are is minuscule compared to the love. What you're describing is that perfect example of crossing boundaries. The education has become the parent's responsibility. And that's why the disappointment is so feared from the child, right? The parent has not handed over education to the child, which is another thing we really need to do. I think of kids as going through school thinking that their education is for their parents and for their teachers. And if they don't get the grades that their parents and teachers expect them to get, they're in trouble, right? Why is it this way? We need to let children know this education is for them. And we need to make education fun. Don't get me off on education. But we need to be able to talk to our children about what they're learning and how they're learning and what's going on in their school lives without directing what they're doing and how they're doing it. That is their job from a very young age. And I think what's going on in the situation you're talking about, and also I used to teach in London quite a bit, And I had a lot of Indian parents, and there's a, as you well know, a very big Indian population. And achievement in academics is so pressurized there as well, and Indian culture fits right in. But I think what that's all about is that the parents are taking responsibility for their kids' education, right? You've got to do this. I'm going to give you money if you get these grades. This is what is important to me. And if you don't do that, you're going to disappoint this whole family. We don't have to say it in words, it's very clear, right? And so then the idea of disappointing parents who have put their whole lives into my education is unbearable to me. So again, it's about having good boundaries. And what is it you want? Where do you want to go to college? How do you want to do this? You know, I say about the school year, I suggest parents talk to their kids about, how would you like this year to end up? What grades would you like to have? If you overheard your teacher talking to another teacher about you in the hallway, what would you like to hear them say? How do you want to end up the year? And then how do you get there? It's up to you. I am very willing to help you achieve your goals, but your goals are your goals. They're not my goals. And that may sound like, oh my God, you're just not caring about how your child does. They're just going to blow it then. And that's not what I'm talking about at all. And every parent knows whether their child is able to do homework on their own or not. If you've got a child with ADHD, if you've got a child with special needs, you learn what you have to do to help and support that child do their homework, right? But what we have is a society of parents who are not necessarily doing their kids' homework for them, but making it happen. And schools are asking parents to sign off on their children's homework. It's like the message is from everywhere. This is your responsibility to make sure your kids do well. It is not. It's not. And it's such a hard, and then we had the whole thing of all those parents, those wealthy parents, paying special people to get their kids into universities. It just gets crazy. We've got to let our kids find their own paths.
That makes so much sense. Every kid has those arguments with their parents where you end up having those discussions where you realize that the parent is more concerned about the social opinion, not so much what is making the kid happy.
Totally.
That you are right. That comes down to how much you love me, but do you accept me?
That's exactly right. That's exactly right. And parents in this predicament, I know, are hearing from their kids, you never let me do anything I want. You don't understand. It's not fair. It's not fair. Get off my back. These are messages that you shouldn't say are, oh, this is just kids. You really need to listen to those messages and ask yourself, how much do I need to pull back? What is my child saying? To take them seriously, you shouldn't take words at face value, but you need to interpret the message and know what the emotional state is that is sending that message. So behavior, if we've got a couple of minutes to talk about this, our culture, and when I say our culture, I'm talking about probably most of the civilized countries in the world. Uncivilized, tribal, they've got it. They got it down. But the
Yeah.
civilized countries are the ones who are messed up. We don't understand behavior, right? Behavior is something that you see, and it is something to be either praised, rewarded, or punished and disapproved of, right? And what we want to think of is that behavior, what you see, is the tip of the iceberg. What you see is on the surface. What you see is 10% of an iceberg. 90% of that iceberg lies hidden beneath the water. As with behavior, behavior is provoked by the emotional state of the child or the person, right? Webster's definition of behavior is the aggregate response of internal stimuli to external stimuli. That means however I am feeling at any given moment, whether it's because my friend just called me a name and I'm all upset, or whether it's because I've been dealing with 8 years of parents not accepting me and me having to fight for who I am, that emotional state is there and it meets with whatever's happening externally. What a parent is saying, what a teacher is saying, what a friend or a peer, a situation, anything external, right? That hits me how I'm feeling right now. And the result of that is behavior. So, behavior is something that I am willing to say most of the time we don't need to deal with at all. If we see unacceptable behavior, that means there is something in that child's emotional state that needs attention, right? So, punishment. So, if there is unacceptable behavior, if the child is screaming, cursing, throwing, hitting, and we punish that child, we are making mountains out of molehills. We are making it worse and worse and worse because that hitting, that screaming, that whatever is coming out of a place of pain, right? It is a place where the child feels powerless, helpless, alone, unaccepted, and the behavior is the message to my world, right? We don't know how to interpret that behavior appropriately. If we like it, we praise it. If we don't like it, we punish it. And when we punish or yell at that behavior or threaten that behavior, if you do that one more time, you don't get to do blah, blah, you are making that pain so much worse, right? And the behavior might come from a triggering situation. You've just asked perfectly nicely for your child to put on his coat because it's time to leave. And your child goes bananas, screaming and yelling. Don't tell me what to do. You never let me do anything I want. I don't want to go. You can't make me. Blah, 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 right? And it's like, whew, what did I do? I didn't even raise my voice, you know? And
Right.
it's like you've told the child to cut off both arms and legs. That situation is a triggering situation that happens because that emotional pain, that emotional state that is filled with unacceptable feelings is up to here. And a triggering situation sets it off. Doesn't have anything to do with the coat. So, what it does have to do with is sometimes a mystery. But that's where parents have to put on their detective hats and really dig down, at least in the moment. You want to listen to the upset and know that that upset, that unacceptable behavior is your signal that your child is in pain. And when you can see it that way, for most parents, it is a 180-degree mindset shift. When you can see it that way, you have no problem making connection, right? I went through this I had a very tough child. I also talk about integrity kids and harmony kids. Integrity kids are those kids who won't take no for an answer and will not be told what to do, fight you on everything, and come out, just steaming. No, you can't do this. And harmony kids are the easygoing, delightful kids that make you feel like a fabulous parent. Integrity kids make you feel like a terrible parent until you really get it. My daughter and I, when she was in preschool, went through horrible fights every morning. We got into power struggles every morning until I got it. She had this fate. Once I got her out of bed, I have this image of her face coming through the door with this grumpy, horrible look on her face. And she had this lip that stuck out about 3 feet. She had that lip for about 2 years. I wanted to cut it off. I hated it so much. It was just, and my assumption, my thoughts about her, right? She was out to get me, right? She was bound and determined to ruin my day. She was doing this on purpose, right? Typical thoughts that parents have of kids like this. That led me to feeling certainly angry, but under anger is always fear that I was not being a good enough parent, fear that I had to change this child. If I was a conscientious parent, how could I let my daughter talk to me like this? And I had to do something about it. All about me, what she was doing to me, how I had to do this, how I had to correct it. What did I have to do? And one morning, I looked at her differently. I don't know what happened to me the night before, but I was teaching parent education, so I'm always learning. And I looked at this face exactly the same. Nothing changed, right? Same lip, everything. And I looked at her and I thought inside my head, I didn't say anything. I thought, wait a minute. She's not out to get me. She's miserable. And everything in me changed, right? All of that anger switched to compassion. And I got the pain that she was in. And I pulled her onto my lap and we talked about, I said, you really don't want to get up and you don't want to go to school and you don't want to leave me. And she's melting into me. And I made that shift and we never had another power struggle. That does not mean she was easy. She was formidable, but I changed. I was the one who understood what was going on. And it changed our relationship entirely. So we've got to understand behavior. Very important.
Thank you for sharing that. I have to ask, when we're talking about behavior, when the child has done something wrong, something that is completely in conflict with your idea of what is moral, what is right, as we see happening around the world, children are, picking up guns, committing criminal acts. How do we handle that? I mean, there's obviously whatever course law takes in a situation like that. But then you also want to get your kid back. You want to put them on the right path. And you also want to understand what just happened.
Right. Well, that situation is what I was talking about a couple minutes ago when I said When you get to that place and your kids have decided they don't want your influence, they don't want your advice, they don't want you telling them what to do anymore, and they've gone their own way, when they get into guns or drugs or anything like that, that is that. No, I shouldn't say drugs, because there are many kids with addictive personalities who have perfectly wonderful relationships with their parents, and they get addicted but I'm talking about what you're talking about, the choices of going in a very, very different direction. So why did that happen? Not this kid's, is deserving of my wrath and my disownment and all of that, but why has my child gotten to the place where he thinks the only thing he can protect himself with now is a gun? Why has this happened? What is going on in his thinking? That's where you've got to go, rather than, oh my God, my child is a criminal, right? And he's got to be. You've got to let the law do what the law does, but he needs your support and understanding more than anything. Understanding does not mean, and trust. The worse the behavior, the more that child needs your trust. Now, this is very, very difficult for most parents to understand, because they're going to say, what, are you going to trust your kid with a gun? Is that trustworthy behavior? That's not what I'm talking about. You need to establish from the get-go your trust in your child and your child's progress and path and developmental process. What that means when you have not done that and you get to the point where you're talking about, this child knows, I can guarantee you, you ask this kid who's gotten in trouble because he's, stolen a car or has a gun or something like that, you ask that kid, how much do you believe your parents trust you? And you're going to hear, what are you talking about? Nothing. Not at all. Right? So that has been broken down for a long time. So to get it back is really tough. You've got to convince this child that you trust this person who has gotten so far off track that this is the only way he sees forward. So it's not looking at this kid wielding a gun. It's, I've got to find that person in there who I raised, who for some reason that I've got to reckon with got very far off track, and bring him back so that by him knowing how much I trust him, and understand that this is the result of the detour he's had to take in his life, because he thought this is all he was able to do to survive, to be in the world, right? You don't have to know all the details. All you need to know is that this child is in enormous pain, but that pain is probably gone by now because it's so covered up with defensive behavior. So it's really hard, but, letting the law take its place is the natural consequence, but you don't have to do that. You can say, this is something that I need to reckon with, that we have gotten so far off track, and we need to make sure that you know how much I love you and accept you and trust you. I think of trust as an IV in our children's arms. that we are, from the time they are born, we are shooting our trust into them 24/7, never falters. And it has nothing to do with behavior. It has all to do with the person and the reason for that behavior.
That explains a lot of what you see online, you see on TV, you see the news on the news channels. That explains a lot. As the parent is trying to repair that trust, a lot of the parents' instinct would be a lot of the parents would try to protect the child from the consequences of their
Yeah.
actions, pulling strings, making donations, blah blah blah. Do you think that is ever the right thing to do?
I think you've got to let the process of the natural consequence happen the way it does. Now, a natural consequence is, I do something to a friend and that friend just doesn't like me anymore, right? That's a real natural consequence. But there are so many situations that I put under the auspices of natural consequence that are man made, like the natural consequence of not doing your homework is something that you deal with between you and your teacher. It's not my job. It's not my problem, right? When it comes to the law needs to take its course. We as a society have created these rules and they need to be put in place. Within that, I am here to support you through this in the best way I can. Not to try to get the law not to touch my special child. That's, I think, immoral. And of course, you want to protect your child at all costs. But it may be that the constant protection has led you to the situation you're in.
There's something that I read about recently that made my jaw hit the floor. That was sexual behavior and how children as young as 9-year-old kids can reach puberty and start having sexual responses and sexual experiences. That blew my mind. Had no idea that could happen, that a 9-year-old could experience these emotions. How do we in those cases set sexual boundaries for our kid?
It's, first of all, how did it happen in the first place? Is it something you want to find out whether this is something that is, medically diagnosable, or is it the result of all the hormones in our food? What kind of a diet has this child had all along? It's not happening because we're a sexual culture. That's not getting them sexual earlier and earlier. It's what has happened in their bodies. And I'm working with a parent right now who has a 10-year-old who is fully developed, has like the breasts of a 17-year-old and full body hair, every in all the places we have body hair. And I don't know why that is, how that happened, but she hates it. The child hates it and feels very uncomfortable and uneasy about it. That's a very, very tough situation, And I come back always to whatever the problem is, it's creating connection with your child. And what connection means is being able to empathize. And what empathy means is not trying to fix the problem. I mean, obviously, if there's a medical something that has to be done, of course, that's your job. But to empathize means to be able to understand what the situation looks like from your child's point of view, not putting your point of view on it and feeling awful. That's sympathy. Empathy is to really be able to, because your child may be upset about something that you think is totally trivial or not worth 2 seconds attention. But it's very important that you see it how your child sees it in order to support, right? So it's being there, being a sounding board for your child to complain, to gripe, to whatever, and you just are there as a, I get it, I get it, you know. And you want to, when you get into conversation and you want to encourage your child to share what's going on with him or her, you want to talk in declaratives. You want to talk in statements, never questions. So I'm seeing that when this situation happens with your friend, that you're feeling really awkward about that. And I'm wondering if this is something that's really tough for you, period. So what I notice, I can see that. If I were you, I bet I would. Statements that start out with, you as a parent are wondering out loud, right? You are not requiring an answer. You end your sentence with a period, not a question mark. That's because when kids are dealing with big emotions, the last thing they want is to feel interrogated and to, you know, if you say, why are you upset about that? Or what does that feel like to you? They don't know how to answer. And then they're left with, well, do I answer what mom really wants to hear? Or do I answer what I know she doesn't want to hear and see the fireworks go off? This is how we set children up to lie an awful lot of times. I had a mother say to me once with her 11-year-old son, who she kept saying, why do you keep lying to me? You are lying to me over and over again. And he finally, after not dealing with her, finally turned to her and said, Mom, if you want me to stop lying, stop asking me questions. I thought that was pretty brilliant. So when we interrogate our kids, they're left with trying to protect themselves, right? Which is what a lie is, protecting myself from getting in trouble. If you don't punish or use consequences in your family, your kids never have to fear getting in trouble. So they don't have to keep things to themselves. They don't have to get sneaky. Anyway, that's a tangent. So connective communication is saying, I get it. I can see that from your point of view, this is what's happening as best you know, because a lot of it you don't know. And I'm wondering if this must leave you feeling such and not, I understand you're angry. That usually infuriates kids. It's getting into it and saying, I'm working on seeing this from your point of view. That's what I want. That's my goal. And if you're off on a wrong track, your kids are going to be happy to tell you, no, that's not it at all. What are you, crazy?
Right.
You know?
Right.
But then they'll probably be more likely to tell you what's going on. Also, introverted kids process things internally. They don't like to talk about their feelings. So this kind of connective communication is brilliant with them because they don't have to talk. They can just take in that you are really attempting to see it their way. You're on my side. You've got my back, right? We all want to feel gotten. Nobody wants to be told what to do unsolicited. Nobody. But we all want to feel understood and gotten.
I think that just might be the only way to get your kid to confide in you about anything of a sexual nature, because there's so much shame around it, so much embarrassment, self-consciousness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's amazing. Now, any resources that you would recommend?
Well, of course, I'm going to push my books. I have 2 books, When Your Kids Push Your Buttons and What You Can Do About It, which is filled with exercises. There's also a workbook that goes along with that book for your own delving into your own situation so it becomes specific. There's also an audio course that goes along with that, and all on my website, which is either bonnieharris.com or connectiveparenting.com. And my second book is is, is Confident Parents, Remarkable Kids, 8 principles for raising kids you'll love to live with. And those are all the principles of connective parenting, the how-tos. It's much more skill-based, and it also puts the principles into everyday situations and shows you how to put them into practice. So those are my 2 books. I'm also writing a new book now on integrity kids and harmony kids. And if you'd like to know a little more about that, go on my website and write in the search bar integrity kid. If you think you've got a child who is fighting you tooth and nail and will not take no for an answer, go in there and just put that in the search bar. And I'm doing a lot more in-depth work on that now. Also, I have a podcast. It's not still going, but it's up and available with 150 episodes called Tell Me About Your Kids. And the podcast is you as a listener get to be a fly on the wall in my individual sessions with parents. So each segment, each episode is a session with a parent over what they're going through with their everyday struggles with their kids and how I work with them. And if you would be interested in working with me, I start with a 30-minute free session, a consultation to determine whether you think I would be right for you. And you can go on my website to find out the Calendly link or the calendar. Yeah, I think you're going to post that link of how to set up a session. But you can start with a 30-minute free consult if you would like. And and go on my website. There'll be a pop-up to sign up for my newsletter, which I send out twice a month with articles, and anything helps you figure out how to contact me for a session or links to my books or the podcast. A lot of stuff is in the newsletter. So.
And I'm going to make sure all the links are available in the episode description.
Great, thank you.
So we've reached the end of this video. Thank you so much for watching and for sharing your time with me. The video description will have the link to all the resources mentioned during the conversation. And if you would rather listen to these episodes, then you can find Experiment Podcast on most podcast platforms. If you enjoyed the video, please do share your thoughts in the comment section. And if you want to watch more, subscribe to the channel, please, and do hit the notification bell. I will see you again in the next video. Till then, please do take care of yourself. Bye.